Mhm. Habari Gani. My name is Chimbuko Tambo. I'm a student in the Pan-African Studies Master's Program at California State University, Los Angeles. It's my privilege to introduce and interview Dr. Maulan Karenga for my Ancient African History class. Let me start the interview by sharing a brief bio on Dr. Karenga. An activist scholar of national and international recognition, Dr. Karenga has had far-reaching effect on Black intellectual and political culture since the 1960s through his intellectual and organizational work and his philosophy called Kawaida. Dr. Maulan Karenga is professor and chair of the Department of Africana Studies at California State University, Long Beach. He is the founder and chair of the organization Us and African People, and the National Association of Kawaida Organizations, or NACO. Dr. Karenga is perhaps most widely known for his creation of the Pan-African and African-American cultural holiday Kwanzaa, which is celebrated by millions and millions of people throughout the world African community on every continent in the world. He is also the creator of the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles, the African communitarian principles, which are used as cultural grounding by millions of people and thousands of organizations around the world African community. Dr. Karenga's publications and research are in Africana Studies, Classical African Ethics of Mat and Ifa, Africana Philosophy, Ethical Philosophy, Social Theory, African and African American Intellectual History, Ethnic Studies, African American Ethics, and the Liberation Ethics of Haji Malcolm X. Dr. Maulan Karenga is the author of numerous scholarly articles and books, including Introduction to Black Studies, Kwanzaa, A Celebration of Family, Community, and Culture, which is the authoritative text for the holiday, selections from the Hosea, Sacred Wisdom of Ancient Egypt, Odu Ifa, The Ethical Teachings, and Mat, The Moral Ideal in Ancient Egypt, A Study in Classical African Ethics. Dr. Karenga is currently working on a seminal work on Haji Malcolm X, which is titled Liberation Ethics of Malcolm X, Critical Consciousness, Moral Grounding, and Transformative Struggle. Moreover, he is the subject of a book authored by Dr. Molefi Kete Asante titled Maulan Karenga, An Intellectual Portrait. Welcome, Dr. Karenga, and thank you so much for the opportunity to interview you.
Good. I'm glad to be here. Asante Sana Chimbuko for this opportunity. I'm glad to engage in this exchange with you. So thanks so very much.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Karenga. Our first question for you is, would you explain what you see as the importance of history?
Appreciate what you've asked about and saying correctly. I start with the assumption given to us by Nana Haji Malcolm X, who said, of all our studies, history is best prepared, best qualified to reward our research. So of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So that's a very important role for history. And he says that, I believe, because, as I reason, that there is no subject that you study that you don't first learn the history of it. So if you study science, you study first the history of science. And if you study anthropology, if you study ethics, if you study engineering, the tendency always is to do what? Begin at the beginning. And that is from the African proverbial philosophical wisdom that says, if you know the beginning well, the end will not trouble you. But in addition to situating history as fundamental to knowledge and understanding ourselves, society, and the world, there are 4 fundamental reasons we study history that shows its importance to us as African people in my philosophy called Kawaida. My philosophy Kawaida, we define as an ongoing synthesis of the best of African sensitivities, thought, and practice in constant exchange with the world. So Kawaida engages history for 4 basic reasons. 1, and see it as a source of our understanding of self, society, and the world. And we say we must have that understanding because how we understand ourselves in the world shapes, even determines how we assert ourselves in the world. So there's four fundamental reasons in Kawaida for studying and engaging history. First, history serves as a source of lessons. And again, here we turn again to Haji Malcolm, who said, as I said earlier, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So we learn the lessons of history. We learn ourselves in history, right? And we understand the development of things. Nothing comes into being by itself. Everything is a result of that which came from it. So we study that and we get the lessons of history. We get the legacies of history. And therefore, we can know and honor our history. And we start off as what our duty is. We always start like this. This is our duty, to know our past and honor it, to engage our present and improve it, and to imagine a whole new future and to forge it in the most ethical, effective, and expansive way. So history is a starting point for us, and it gives us lessons, understanding of ourselves, our society, and the world. Second, we study history in order to absorb its spirit of human possibility. Here, the Honorable Marcus Garvey teaches us that what humans have done, humans can do. And so when we are looking for inspiration, things look rather bleak, right? And we're talking about struggling to expand the realm of human freedom in this country and the world, we can reach back and get a model and get a spirit from Nana Harriet Tubman, who actually, against all odds, in the most savage condition, one of the most savage conditions in human history, the Holocaust of enslavement, right? She takes a context of total unfreedom and imagines and remembers freedom. And with that spirit, she not only saves herself in community, but she actually redefines freedom from individual escape to the collective practice of self-determination in and for community. So this spirit of resilience and resourcefulness we find in history, we find in our history. We learn that we are sacred and soulful by studying our history, the best practices of our peoples as African people all over the world. And then third, of course, we study history to extract and emulate its models of human possibility. In fact, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune teaches us that we are heirs and custodians of a great legacy. And therefore, we say we must bear the burden and glory of that legacy with strength, dignity, and determination. And so we have these models of human excellence that we can emulate there. And when we, for example, Nana Shekanta Diop says to us, we must extract paradigms of excellence from, for example, ancient Egypt and use them to ground ourselves and improve our lives and push our lives forward. And then the fourth thing we study history in practice of the morality of remembrance. In Kawaida, we stress practicing the morality of remembrance. And here, Nana Fanny Luhema tells us there are two things we all should care about: never to forget where we came from, and always praise the bridges that carried us over. So we honor them as they have honored us. They brought us into being. In fact, there's a beautiful verse in the Hosea, the sacred text of ancient Egypt, that I've been collecting and translating and putting together as a unit since 1984. And in it, this verse from the book Coming Forth by Day, inside the Hosea, says, honored ancestors, give us your arm, that is your insight, your strength, right? For you, we are divine beings that came into being through you, okay? So it's a beautiful understanding, and we remember them, and we always ask them for guidance, and we give honor to them. We give honor to them by remembering them, by reflecting on them, by reaffirming our relationship with them. That is so important for us. And so those are some of the things that we talk about when we talk about the importance of history. And one of the things I should say about history is that history is just not the past. History is with us, right? And so it's a continuous flow. Therefore, we are always in relationship to history, the present, and the future. We stand there. In the present, we reach back to the past and we look forward to the future. And we say again, this is our duty to know our past. That is our history, to know our past and honor it, to engage our present and improve it, and to imagine a whole new future and to forge it in the most ethical, effective, and expansive way. And this now, of course, is called the practice of Sankova, reaching back and retrieving it, and use the best of our sensitivity, thought, and practice to ground ourselves, to orient ourselves, and to direct our lives toward good and expansive ends.
Thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Karenga.
Thank you.
In your answer, you provided a perfect segue for my next question when you mentioned about your writing the selections from the Hosea, Sacred Wisdom of Ancient Egypt in 1984. Also in 1984, you called together major scholars and historians, including Dr. Jacob Carruthers, Dr. John Jackson, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben Jochanan, Dr. Molefi Asante, and many others. And you organized and convened, along with your organization, the organization US, the first annual Ancient Egyptian Studies Conference, which all of these scholars attended and presented at. And out of that conference came the organization ASCAC, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. I'm wondering if you would please share with us the importance of that first conference in establishing the Association for the Study of African Classical.
So, thank you for that question, because a lot of time history is hidden by myths, by people leaving things out, or misdirecting people in understanding how things came into being. But actually, ASCAC is the project of the organization, that's the African American Culture Center and the Kawita Institute of Pan-African Studies, three organizations which the organization is at the center, the organization US is at the center of. And so the conversation grew around our study of Sheikh Anta Diop about the importance of Egypt. And so, and in terms of how we understand ourselves and assert ourselves in the world. And so Nana Sheikh Anta Diop has said that we need to reach back and extract paradigms of Egypt and use them in our lives today. He made a distinction between the dilettantes that want to just go back and refer to Egypt and keep saying that Egyptians are Black. He said we don't need to keep saying that except as a historical fact. What we need to do is turn this recognition that Egypt is a part of African history into a scientific operational concept. In other words, use it to ground ourselves, as I always say, to ground ourselves, to orient ourselves, and to direct our lives toward good and expansive end. And he said, if we reach back to Egypt and we return it to Africa, right, then we achieve three things. One, we reconcile African history and civilization, and we recognize African history with human history, because human history is out of joint when it lifts Africa. I mean, it lifts Egypt out of Africa and puts it in some place called the Middle East, right? We're the only, Egypt is the only civilization in history that had to justify its geography for racists. In other words, explain why it's in Africa when it shouldn't be there if what the racists say about Africans were true. So the reality is that we have to return Egypt to Africa as part of our self-understanding and self-assertion in the world. So the first thing is going to reconcile African history and civilization with human history and civilization, with itself first and with human history. And second, he said, it gives us the basis for paradigms, which in fact help us to renew, to build a new body of human sciences, right? What does Africa say about how we study the world, how we engage the world, right? We know what Europe has to do. We know what Asia has to do. We know what other groups do, but what does Africa say about the world? What does it say about the environment? What does it say about how we raise our children? How we build male-female relationships, how we build families, right? How we engage science and medicine. What does it say? And so he said one of the most important places to start is at the beginning, right? And Egypt has abundant texts available for us to study and to learn who we are and how we are developed through time. And finally, he said, not only would it reconcile African history and civilization, help us to reconcile African civilization and African history and civilization and human civilization and history, but it also give us the basis for building a new body of human sciences, but it will also aid us in renewing African culture, right? Because he's a warrior on the battlefield culture, right? And he understood what we say in Kauida, that culture is our fundamental way of being human in the world. And so culture in Kauida philosophy is a center of what we do. And we said one of the most important things we can do is to have dialogue, constant dialogue with African culture, asking it questions and seeking from it answers to the fundamental issues of humankind. Again, how do we understand ourselves? How do we treat the most vulnerable among us? How do we honor our ancestors? How do we speak our own special cultural truth and make our own unique contribution to the forward flow of human history and the reimagination and reconstruction of the world as we know it, beginning with our own societies in which we live? And so it's so important for us to understand that. So these conversations about Egypt then led to what we always think of. How do we structure this so that we build community, we build a body of scholars, we build a contribution to the movement? So it's both an intellectual project and a social and political project. This thinking about ancient Egypt and how we can use this study to actually have a new initiative in our community and in the movement. So we first thought about what is the best way to approach Egypt. Now, people have approached Egypt in a lot of ways, you know. The religious people from the Abrahamic tradition had demonized ancient Egypt, right? It's a land of the bondage. So you'll miss its science, right? And technology. You'll mention, but especially for us, you'll miss its spiritual and ethical grounding. There is no spirituality deeper, no ethics more informative or at a higher level than ancient Egyptian or Mayan ethics. So we wanted to do that. And what we wanted to do at a time like this is to have our fundamental contribution to a great need in society today. We argued that one of the most important ways we can engage any issue is ethically. And that as you notice the development of education, especially in higher education in the university system, every discipline had begun to attach ethics to it. So we talked about biomedical ethics, we talked about environmental ethics, right? We talked about business ethics, computer ethics, political ethics, etc. And so the question again for us in our organization and in Kauida philosophy is, what does Africa have to say about this, right? And so we reach back to Egypt, which has abundant documents, right? And has our thought before the coming of the European that introduced a new conversation in our lives, right? And so what do we think before we meet these people, the colonialists, the imperialists, etc.? So that was important too. And then it was important for us to do the ethical, right? That was important to us. And we argued that we wanted to introduce a new focus in the movement also, an ethical conversation there. If ethics were that important, we needed to introduce ethics. And you notice since 84, Black people in the movement and in the academy stress ethics in a whole different kind of way. And usually they point back to ancient Egypt. And that's one of the achievements of this movement that we initiated. And also, one of the things that we did was to introduce the category of Mat in various iterations. We say, yes, Egypt did science. Yes, Egypt did spirituality. Yes, Egypt did medicine. Yes, Egypt built monuments. But the key gift for us in our organization, in African American culture, in the Kawhi Institute of Pan-African Studies, in the organization, is its ethical contribution and spiritual contribution, and that is categories we say as Ma'at. And so what I began to do with our organization and within our organization is begin to translate these texts and to produce what we call a new sacred text from old sacred texts. And the new is not that it's new out of air, but it's based on the ancient, but it's organized in a nice and new way, right? And we call it the Hosea. And the Hosea is taken from the names of two divine powers by which it is written in the sacred text that Amen-Ra, created the world, who is creative speech, right? And Sia is extraordinary and exceptional understanding, right? And so authoritative and creative speech for Hosea, and exceptional and extraordinary insight for Sia. So Hosea, and that's the name of the sacred text. And in that sacred text, we have an ethics that can cover every subject we encounter. We can use it as a basis to build. And so we say, let's use Ma'at. We say M-A-A-T or M-A'-A-T. The apostrophe is really a transliteration for ayin, which we don't have in English. So it's Ma'at in ancient Egyptian. But most of the time we just say Ma'at or Ma'at. And we wanted to introduce Ma'at, which we have, right? Before our conversation, Ma'at was not that much used, right? People knew about it, right? But they talk about it as a goddess, right? You talk about it as a spiritual principle. We talked about it and introduced it and established it as a fundamental category for understanding the whole of our life. So we introduced the concept Martian ethics, Martian ontology, Martian anthropology, right? And we say this is Egypt's most important gift for us. It's spiritual and ethical legacy rooted in the concept and practice of Ma'at in the world. And what we wanted to do was to develop a literature and language of Martian discourse. Why is that important? Because if we're going to think differently, then we need a language to think. Haji Malcolm said that the logic of the oppressed cannot be the logic of the oppressor if they want liberation, right? And if we see learning and knowledge as a practice of freedom, and we see thinking different as central, then if we have a logic of liberation, we must have a language, a liberating language, a liberating and liberated language that informs that logic. You can't think without these words. And so what we want to do is get words that are key to this Martian project. For example, we developed the concept of the sejimic person, and it's taken from the Egyptian word sejim, right? And this is a model person for us in Kawaida Mat, right? And the sejim or sejim has to do, the sejimu, sejim is it means three things. It means to listen, it means to hear, and it means to engage in action as is appropriate, engage in appropriate action as is requested and required. And so what I've done is translated listening into a rightful attentiveness, hearing into empathetic understanding, and complying. These are the three things that the verb in ancient Egypt, sejam, means: listening, hearing, and complying. So again, and complying is appropriate action as required and requested. So let me just go over that again. So first, listening, hearing, and complying. That's the normal way we understand. And I'm doing this to show you how, as Nana Diop said, we can take this and begin to develop a whole new conversation about our lives, right? And this fits into what we already talked before we even read Nana Diop, is that we said the key crisis in Black life, whether we're in the continent or in diaspora, the key crisis in African life is a cultural crisis. That is overcoming the category, the catechism of impossibilities, right? That Europe has created for us by conceptually imprisoning us in its own way of thinking and acting, right? And reasoning, right? And much of it is anti-human. It's certainly anti-communal. It's anti-community. It's anti-unity. It involves at its heart a vulgar individualism, right? That imagines, wrongly so, because it only makes you more vulnerable. It doesn't increase your power. Imagine that you can live alone, or no one matters but you, right? So we talk against that. We talk about how relationships are the hub and hinge on which the whole of human life turns and depends, right? And so what we do as African people is ask, what is the quality of our relationships? Always, what are the quality of our relationships? Because relationships can either make your day or take your life. And so what we want to do is to always stress relationships, and that means ethical relationships. And so what we want to do also is then introduce Ma'at and Matin ethics as a central field in Black studies. So it has an educational dimension to it. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Africana Studies at Cal State Long Beach, and I've lectured. I'm one of the founding scholars of Black studies, the discipline of Black studies. So I'm always interested in strengthening and expanding the field. And one of the most important things I reasoned, and our organization reasoned, and let me stop here to say that I want to acknowledge you, Saber Chimbuko Tambo, and Saber means a moral teacher, because that's the next point I want to talk about, is to create these people who know the language, who know the culture, and can teach it, right? So you on the executive circle, and when we made all these plans, and you helped organize that conference, right, to put it together and to ensure that it was a very successful conference. And so what we wanted to do again is to introduce Mayan ethics as a central field in Black studies. We got Abrahamic ethics. We got the Christian ethics. We got the Jewish ethics. We got the Muslim ethics, right? But we didn't have an original religious ethics or an original ethics from Africa, right? And so what we wanted to do is do Sankofa, reach back, retrieve that, the best of what it means to be African and human, speak that special culture truth to the world, and use it to make our own unique contribution to how this society and world are reconceived and reconstructed, and to advance the human future and improve the human condition. And then in order to do that, we knew we needed to build a community of scholars. So that's why we called all those other scholars together that you mentioned earlier, Saber Chimbuko. And we wanted to build this community of scholars and a professional association to achieve our goals, right? We wanted to train and build a community also of Saber Mat, which again comes back to what I was saying to you, moral teachers who would study the language, study the culture, and shared that to improve our lives, right? To strengthen our struggle, to expand the realm of freedom and justice and good in the world, right? And we wanted to use this process and practice in the service of the liberation and upliftment of our people. So those were some of the things that we talked about, right? And we set it in motion, and then we went on and built what we were building, because we were doing most of these things when we started and proposed it to others. So even though we stopped working in ASCAC for a lot of reasons, we nevertheless continue even now to advance ancient Egypt and to extract paradigms of possibility from it: intellectual paradigm, social paradigm, relational paradigm. And I wanted to go back to the idea that, of what I was saying, giving you an example of how we can develop paradigms of thought. And I was talking about the Sejimic person, and how the Sejimic person is conceived as doing the three things that we talked about Sejim mean. Sejim is to listen, to hear, and to comply. And so listening means rightful attentiveness. Hearing means empathetic understanding. That's when people say, I feel you, right? I understand you because I feel you, right? And then, of course, I'm sensitive to you. And then finally, appropriate action. That complying means appropriate action as both required and requested. Sometimes people request, sometimes they don't, but you know it's required. And Mott said you are morally obligated to respond to engage in appropriate action as required, even if it's not requested. And that's a beautiful aspect of that, because what we do is, doing all this, we build a moral community we all want and deserve to live in and leave as a legacy worthy of the name and history African. So those are some of the thoughts we had and practices we engaged in. I thought I would be finished with translating and compiling the sacred text, and based on the sacred text of ancient Egypt, which did not have a total unity to them. You have many sacred texts. And what I wanted to do is extract the best of the teaching from that and put it into a comprehensive corpus of sacred texts called the Husia. And I started this in 84. I thought I'd be finished in 20 years. It's now about 40. And so I'm going to finish it, but it has taken longer. And I thought it would have gone faster if the people I had called together were able to stay together and to focus on that. But, as an organization grew, people were turned a lot to making the tours rather than doing the study, right? And to building conferences rather than to build structures, write the books, and help with the translation that was necessary. But we continue our organization. That's the African American Culture Center, Kipas Kawida Institute of Pan-African Studies. We're still involved in that, and we will complete that, right? And I produced for that the first literature. Of course, we gave the organization its name, ASCAC, Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. We produced this first literature, and of course organized and financed the first conference for this Ancient Egyptian Studies Conference in 1984. So that's a brief history of why we did it and what work we continue to do in that respect.
Thank you, Dr. Karenga. Asante Sana for your full and engaging response. You actually answered my third question, which was, I'm going to still ask you because I think it's important. After earning your first doctorate in political science, and you went back to school to USC to get a second doctorate in social ethics, and your dissertation and then the subsequent book out of your dissertation was Mott, the Moral Ideal in Ancient Egypt, a Study in Classical African Ethics. And my question was, you answered it why the emphasis on ethics as distinct from, maybe the technological aspects of ancient Egypt or the science, the monuments, the art. There's so much to choose from, but you gave a full explanation of that. And I appreciate your dedication and your commitment to scholarship to actually go back to school and get a second doctorate.
Gabriel, appreciate what you said, if I understand correctly. It is both modern and ancient, the reasoning here. The modern reason is that one of the most important ways that we have to and must engage problems of our time, challenges of our time, is in an ethical manner. And as I said, people realize that in higher education by stressing ethics as a fundamental component of the work that we do. So again, if we talk about medical ethics or biomedical ethics or computer ethics or political ethics or business ethics or environmental ethics, that's a field that Black studies must include in the discipline, right? And I said to ourselves, who has older ethics than we? We're the fathers and mothers of humanity and human civilization. Introduced some of the basic discipline of human knowledge in the Nile Valley, right? And so the question is, how do we extract and emulate those paradigms of human excellence and human possibility? And that meant studying the ethical text and foregrounding that. Doesn't mean I put down people who stress the field or discipline that they're in, right? People can do medicine, they can do monuments, architecture, they can do engineering, right? They can do all of it. They can do medicine. Because we have so many texts, as I said, we introduced some of the basic discipline of human knowledge in the Nile Valley, right? So there's a lot to study. But guess what? The foundation and framework for all the work that the ancient Egyptians did, if you read the text, was in Ma'at. The question is, how does Ma'at inform their work? How does Ma'at form legal practices? How does it inform engineering? How does it inform building a temple? How does it inform mathematics? So the question is, what is Ma'at? Ma'at is rightness and good in the world. And so we engage every subject, every relationship by the questions of its rightness and goodness, right? When we talk about rightness, does it fit within an order of goodness? When we talk about goodness, does it benefit humanity and the earth itself? That's what we strive for, African and human good and the well-being of the world. And Montian ethics, it's the oldest conversation, the oldest moral conversation we have records of, right? You know, it doesn't mean other people didn't talk it, but I'm talking about what we have records of, right? There is no text, Abrahamic or others, that's more ancient or richer or more relevant to African lives than the Hosea and the texts that are in that Hosea. So I wanted to capture that. And I could have done this study without going back to college or to the university to get a second doctorate. But I wanted a discipline. I wanted a challenge. And I wanted a product that measured up to the highest scholarship. And see, like I always tell people, look, if you want criticism that causes you to grow, right? Then you must not simply ask your mother and father who's gonna like reinforce you and tell you how good you are. You have to go into enemy or oppressor or opponent's camp, right? Test your ideas and your scholarship in relationship to theirs. And when you go to the table and put your product on the table, we have to say, you will know how good it is, how well done your work is. Even if they disagree with your conclusions, they cannot deny the rigor of your scholarship. That's the kind of work we want to do. I repeat, work that is of such excellence that even when your opponents or people who are different than you, they don't need to, they have different conclusions than you, that even though they might disagree with you, they cannot deny the rigor of your scholarship. We say Africa means excellence. If African doesn't mean excellence, what does it do? The other thing I wanted to do was to advance the whole idea that's already in Kawaida before we engage Egypt. And we engaged Egypt in the 60s, but not in the way we did now. So the idea was that Africa is our moral and spiritual idea. And by that I mean our ancient ancient Africa as a paradigm, not modern Africa with the issues that face it a lot of time, but the best of its values from ancient times to now, right? Continental and diasporan. What does Africa have to say about the major issues of the world, right? I'm an African-centered scholar. I don't want to ask Europe or Asia, how to live my life, how to raise my children, how to treat my wife, my brother, my sister, how I should treat the vulnerable, right? Or relate to the elderly, or relate rightfully to the environment. I have to ask Africa that if I'm African-centered. And I have to have text, whether it's oral, written, or living practice text. There are three kinds of historical text for us in Kawaida. So oral text, written text, and living practice text. Learning from the practice of our ancestors, not just what they said and taught, right? Or wrote, but how they lived their lives, did their work, and waged their struggle to expand the realm of African and human good and the well-being of the world. How did they do that? And that, how we honor them. We honor them by trying as best we can to lift up and live the legacy they have left us. And so in studying ancient Egypt, going all the way back there, that helped me. And I wanted to produce I wrote an 800-page dissertation, right? To demonstrate not what Egypt gave to Greece, that would still keep Greece as a fundamental reference point, but what it gave the world and how we can use these beautiful ideas from Africa, right? To ground our lives, orient our lives, and direct our lives towards good and expansive ends. And Egypt is a major point for that. And again, it doesn't mean I don't study the other ones. I did a similar thing, not as thorough and not as deeply as I did ancient Egypt, and I'm doing Egypt. But in the Yoruba ethics, in the Odu Ifa, the sacred text of ancient Yoruba land, right? I studied that, and I studied the ethical text, and I introduced a new conversation around Ifa ethics, Kawaida Ifa ethics, we call it, because we put Kawaida in just to know that, there are different schools of thought in Ifa, but ours is Kawaida Ifa ethics. And mainly Ifa, just like ancient Egyptian, was thought about and taught in different ways. So was Ifa. Ifa was mainly a divination practice and religious. It's oriented around divination. But I said there's an ethical dimension to it. And so I produced in 99 translation and commentary on some of the critical verses in the Odu Ifa, one of Africa's most important texts in a world encompassing sacred texts, right? Because it's the basis for Africans all over the world who brought Ifa teachings throughout the world, especially in the Americas and in South and North America, in Brazil, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and of course, the United States of America. Other parts in South America too. So I just think it's very important for us. It's a way to unite us too. And we've been united around that. Sometimes people do it unconsciously. They don't know how it started. So I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the origins of this conversation and words that people use. For example, when we say seven cardinal virtues. So that's another thing I do, is I formulate ways to understand ancient Egyptian ethics from a Kawita perspective. So Kawita Matin ethic, like when I say the seven cardinal virtues of Mahat, that's the introduction and the creation that I developed, right? And so there's seven cardinal virtues, or truth, justice, propriety, harmony, balance, reciprocity, and righteous order. Now, sometimes people want to change those around, make like they somehow found this somewhere in an ancient Egyptian text. No, that's what I extracted from the ancestor, because I believe that we're not only supposed to learn the tradition, we're supposed to engage the tradition, add to the extent tradition, expand it, leave our contribution so that other people can build on what we have given, also in honor of the tradition that was left for us. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karenga. My final question for you is that I'm paraphrasing here, but one of your key quotes is that history is a very human thing. History is a very human thing. Our history is in our own hands in what we do and do not do every day. If you could elaborate on what you mean by that quote.
Yes, yeah. We say that history is a very human thing. We bring it into being by what we do and do not do. If we fail, the oppressor is always there to record it. And if we succeed, that brings our own voice, and we must raise it up, right? And speak our special cultural truth and make our own unique contribution to the forward flow of human history. We have a responsibility to speak our own special cultural truth and make our own unique contribution to the forward flow of human history. We must show agency here. It is the will and capacity to act, right? We got to choose to be good. Just like in the ancient, this is giving a chance to talk about Odu Ifa, one of the most beautiful verses in the Odu Ifa says, let's do things with joy, for surely humans have been divinely chosen to bring good into the world. And we say then, this is the fundamental mission and meaning of human life. What a beautiful concept that we are chosen, not over and against anybody, not claiming we're the only people chosen, right? But everyone is chosen, and they're chosen not over and against anyone, but chosen with everyone to do what? To bring good in the world. So whether you're a farmer or a pharmacist, a judge, a journalist, a student, a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, right? Whatever you are, you use that field of thought and practice to do what? Bring good into the world. What a beautiful African concept. And that makes history. History is a very human thing. We make it. And just like if we take that verse, we are chosen. Because even as we're chosen, we must choose. We must choose love over hate. We must choose justice over injustice. We must choose freedom over infreedom. We must choose the best rather than the worst. We must choose to act and to care and to build. We must choose. And we say you begin to do that by practicing a Black value system. And even though we say the Matin ethics, the seven cardinal virtues, that fits within a larger set of African values, which are the Nguzo Saba, the seven principles. People think it's the seven principles of Kwanzaa, but it's really the seven principles of Kawita philosophy, out of which I created both Kwanzaa and the Nguzo Saba, right? And Kwanzaa is, as everyone knows, and as Savior Tumbuko introduced, it's a Pan-African, African-American and Pan-African holiday that celebrates family, community, and culture, celebrated all over the world, on every continent in the world, throughout the world African community. And those values are, first in Swahili and then in English, Umoja, unity. Kujichagulia, self-determination. Ujima, collective working responsibility. Ujamaa, cooperative economics. Nia, purpose. Kuumba, creativity. And Imani, faith. Again, I'm going for the ethical. We were talking this in the 60s, but we didn't use these categories. We said values. We need values, but the values we were talking about were ethical and cultural values, right? Cultural values first, but ethics are the central cultural values, right? And so we talk about making a history worthy of the name and history African. We talked about doing things that are worthy of the name and history African. Just think about that. Doing things. Are they worthy of the name African? Are they worthy of the history of Africa? We are a great people. There is no people more holy or sacred than ourselves. No history more worthy of being told or taught than African history. And there is no way that we can, in fact, honor ourselves without knowing and honoring our history and using that to improve our present and to imagine a whole new future and to forge it in the most ethical, effective, and expansive way. This way, we honor our ancestors, reaffirm and uplift our people, and open the way to a new history and hope for Africans, humanity, and the world as a whole.
Asante, that was beautiful, Dr. Karenga. Before we close out, is there anything else that you'd like to share that perhaps I didn't ask you about?
No, I think we've just about covered. I did want to say something about history, and a lot of times people, and actually it's a continuation on what you asked me, and that is the whole idea we stressed on history is very human, because a lot of times people kind of see it as not human in an expansive, inclusive sense. They think it's human in terms of what kings and queens, ignorant presidents, and prime ministers, genocide of prime ministers, right? They think that's the history, right? That's not. It's not kings and queens, right? It's everybody, right? And we also, of course, in Africa, in Kawaida Mat, I should say, we always say there's no royalty, there's no royalty except in righteousness, and no aristocracy except in service. And the latter one comes from, of course, Honorable Marcus Garvey, who said, yes, we'll have an aristocracy in Africa, but it'll be based on service. So we're supposed to serve the people, right? And serve the interests of African and human good and the well-being of the world. And I wanted to talk about, just in ending, the struggles that humans engage in and have engaged in since the beginning of time. 4 areas of struggle. First, the struggle with nature. Second, the struggle with society. Third, the struggle with others, collective and personal. And finally, the struggle with ourselves, right? So the first struggle is nature. You know, people can have nice stories about gardens and how we didn't work and all that. And I don't want to diminish that or not, right? But I do want to make a distinction between our narrative of faith and our narrative of fact. Our narrative of faith is our religion. Our narrative of fact is our history. And so we have to always bring evidence when we talk history. So the evidence is that when we started out, we had to struggle with nature. Now, notice I didn't say struggle against nature. That's from another culture, right? I'm going to struggle with nature to make nature an ally rather than an enemy. That's what I do, right? That's what we do as African people, right? We have diseases, right? We have to find cures for them. And so people begin to collect plants, right? And things to cure and to heal. And we develop the science of medicine. Little by little, century by century, we do that, right? we begin to say we don't need to keep running after animals. We need to plant. We need to have farming. We might not even have a name for it when we start, but we do it. And finally, guess what? We're able to sit down, look up at the stars, measure them, talk about them, give them names, right? And develop the science of astronomy. We want to move beyond small dwellings and build larger ones, large houses, temples, other things, right? Monument. And we developed the science of architecture and engineering, right? And so I want us to see that struggle to overcome the limitations of nature and to make nature an ally rather than an enemy. The very things that happen in nature that are negative to us have the solution also to aid us. And that's why we have to understand there's a problem of artificiality in human life. We talk a lot now about artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence comes and is received with such enthusiasm because over the years, we developed an artificiality to our lives. And we could talk about that, but that means studying the history and seeing the development. Again, nothing comes into being by itself. Everything is a result of that which came before it. So we struggle with nature, not to kill it, not to subdue it, right? To care for it. As Hatshepsut said, Queen Hatshepsut said, as a loving daughter would do for her father. And she's talking about Amun-Ra at this point, right? And the same with Amenhotep III, that Ra set them on the earth so they would take care of the earth. All the oceans encircle, all the sun encircle. I mean, the whole idea of having a filial obligation to maintain the world, to rule it, Ra says, the Thutmose, as if I were king in Egypt. What a beautiful thought that the sacred text says those who are royal must be royal in righteousness and rule, all right, govern, that is to say, govern the land as if Ra, the divine one, was ruling it. And so we struggle with nature. And you look at all the medicines and all the healing power. Look at all the minerals we've mined and how studying that improves our life, but also how people can misuse it, right? Who would ever think we need a bomb, that can destroy the whole planet? Who thought of that, It's struggling without might. You see that? People who don't have might, they think of ways to kill rather than heal. They think of ways to conquer rather than to cooperate. They think of ways to degrade rather than build lasting relationships that are good for all of us, humans, the animals, the trees, the earth, and all in it. Second, struggle with society. Much of our history in this country and elsewhere has been a struggle with social structures that oppress, that create systems of domination, deprivation, and degradation of others. That's been a fundamental feature of human history in every part of the world, including our own. We can't mythologize our history. What we have to do is take out the best examples, the best of what it means to be African and human, and use that as a model. That's for we and us say in Kawaida philosophy. We base our sensitivity, thought, and practice on two things: tradition and reason. We ask, what did our ancestors say, right? And then, does that measure up to the best of our moral reasoning now? Right? So we study history, we see people develop. That means they give up certain things or expand certain things from where they are, because we always have to develop, otherwise we contract, wither, and pass away. And so we struggle with these societies, and we rebel, we revolt, we make revolution. We expand the realm of human freedom and justice, right? We increase conditions and capacity for people to live good lives, flourish, and come into the fullness of themselves. That's a beautiful struggle. As Dr. Martin Luther King says, it's a bitter struggle, but it's a beautiful struggle. And as Nana Fannie Hamer said, that we have to fight every step of the way to advance the realm of human freedom and justice in this country and the world. And you know that's right. And Nana A. Philip Randolph said, freedom is never a final fact, right? That we have to keep expanding the realm of human freedom, because in our struggle for freedom, we expand our conception of it as a possibility and a presence, right? So we have to continue to struggle. And here I wanted to come back, and because I didn't start with, and say in terms of history, if history has to do with struggle, understand that struggle is not a negative thing. One of the most defining struggles, one of the most defining features of the human person, right? We struggle to come into being. That's called birth. We struggle to make the most out of our being. That's called life. And we struggle not to go out of being. That's called the quest for immortality. So in our struggle with nature, to improve our life, to make nature an ally rather than an enemy, in our struggle to expand the realm of human freedom and justice and good in the world, right? Let's struggle with society. Then we move to struggle with others. How do we build the best relationship with other people different and also vulnerable? How do we do that? How do we struggle to deal with our difference and make our difference a ground for discussing the richness of our difference? How do we relate to people in such a way that we recognize, as we say in Kawaida, that each people and culture is a unique and equally valid and valuable way of being human in the world? And that in the richness of our diversity, we must always find common ground. What is our common ground? And of course, the first thing starts with it is mutual respect for each people and culture. And then commitment to the rights and dignity of the human person, the well-being and flourishing of family and community, the integrity and value of the environment, and the reciprocal solidarity and cooperation of humanity for common good. This is a fundamental interest we can have in our relationship with each other, in our building the good world we all want and deserve to live in. And finally, there's a struggle with ourselves, especially oppressed people, but all people. Struggle to expand our conception of ourselves. People who've been oppressed, colonized, they have a tendency to accept the teaching of the oppressor. And we say in Kawaida, our oppressor can never be our teacher, and our allies cannot be our tutor. That we must learn from the world, but we will also teach the world. We must absorb from the world, but not be absorbed by the world. We must again speak. We have both the right and responsibility to speak our own special culture truth and make our own unique contribution to the forward flow of human history. And sometimes, if we're not careful, the oppressor would teach us a catechism of impossibilities. And we must do is break the monopoly that the oppressor has on so many of our minds. For until we break the monopoly that the oppressor has on so many of our minds, liberation is not only impossible, it's unthinkable. As we say, what you can't conceive, you can't achieve. If you can't imagine reform, we don't need to talk about revolution, right? So we have to be able to think deep about life. The word in ancient Egyptian for thinking deep is Jair in Kawaida tradition. Kawaida Matian tradition, Jair ancient means deep thinking. And it's really, Jair is a medical term, and we're dealing with history here. That's why history is so rich, right? You go back, that rich culture, right? And in that, they have different aspects of Jair, because Jair evolves from medical conversation. And that medical conversation gives us a model for critical thinking, right? And creative thinking. So it first starts with probing, right? Then discovery, right? Then diagnosis, then prognosis and prescription, those 5 elements. So when we talk about probing, we talk about research. Here we're talking historical research, right? Then we discover things, right? But then we have to analyze and ask, what does it mean, right? But what are we looking at here? And then we need to do prognosis. Where does this go from here? That's the recommendations, right, for your study. Where does it? And then prescriptions, right? What is it that we should study more? Where do we go? How do we, in fact, take advantage of this knowledge, right? So we have, of course, research, we have discovery, we have analysis, we have comparative discussions, and then we have prescriptions for what we should be about. Right? What should we be about? And so I want us to see that this struggle in history, for history, and as history involves the struggle with nature to make it an ally rather than an enemy, and to discover and use its riches. One of the beautiful things about nature as an ally reminds me of Nana Dr. George Washington Carver. He says we have to love the earth. We have to love nature. And if we love nature and treat it lovingly and caringly, it will yield its secrets like anyone loves, cared for, right? And engaged rightly. I like that, right? I like, he says, we have to co-create a new world, right? And we have to do it together in mutual respect and mutual appreciation. So I think that's a good way to end. And because I'm an activist scholar, I would like to like to end by saying all we do is in honor of those who came before us, the people who live with us and turn to us, who have knowledge to share it, and then for the future generations, right? And so it's important for us to think, what does this or that mean to us in terms of advancing African and human good and the well-being of the world? And what do the ancestors say to us over time? I said the first part. I said it when I started. I want to end it as I do with many of my lectures. This is our duty, we should remember, to know our past and honor it, to engage our present and improve it, and to imagine a whole new future and to forge it in the most ethical, effective, and expansive way. And this too, the ancestors tell us, continue the struggle, keep the faith, hold the line, love and respect our people and each other, practice the Nguzo Saba, the seven principles, seek and speak truth, do and demand justice, be constantly concerned with the well-being of the world and all in it, and dare help rebuild the overarching movement that prefigures and makes possible the good world we all want and deserve to live in and leave as a legacy worthy of the name and history African. Hotep, Ashe, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karenga. Thank you
Thank you.
sharing
Sante Sana.
Sante Sana, for sharing the wealth of your knowledge. You gave us so much to think about. I really appreciate how you showed us the rich resources of our culture that we can use to engage the world and improve the world that we're living in. Thank you for your knowledge, and thank you for your fire. You always bring that fire that inspires us to keep on struggling. Thank you, of course, for your 58 years of work, struggle, service, and institution building on behalf of our people. It's been a great interview. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Karenga.
Sante to you. And homage to our ancestors, especially my mother and father, who taught me African way to stand and walk and work and struggle in the world. And thank you for this interview, Saber Mat Timbuko Tembo. And again, Saber Mat means a teacher of Mat or a moral teacher. And the things that I've said about our organization since Saber Timbuko has been in the organization, she has helped us to build this from the late 70s to now. So thank you, Asante Sana. As we always say, Asante Sana, Asante Nyingi na Bari ya Asante Mchanga wa Pwani ni Haba, which means thanks, many thanks. And compared to the many times we say thanks, the grains of sand on the seashore are few. Asante ni tutaona.
Sana, again, we thank you, Dr. Karenga. Thank you.
Tutaona.
Asante.
Asante Sewa Chumuko.